His Excellent Ambassador, Georg Sparber, is Ambassador of Principality of Liechtenstein to the United States of America since 2021. He also serves as a Liechtenstein Permanent Observer to the Organization of American States. Before assuming his current duties, he held the position of a Deputy Permanent Representative of Liechtenstein to the United Nations in New York since January 2017. His portfolio included disarmament, peace, security, and political issues, what we need now. From 2014 to 2016, Ambassador Sparber, okay, Italian style, okay, served as a deputy head of a mission at the Liechtenstein Embassy in Vienna, with accreditation to Austria and Czech Republic. During the time, he was also deputy permanent representative of Liechtenstein to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, the United Nations and other international organizations in Vienna, including the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. From 2010 to 2014, Ambassador Sparber was posted to the permanent mission of Liechtenstein, New York, and was responsible for development, human rights, global governance, and elections. He joined the Office of Foreign Affairs in Vaduz in 2009. Ambassador Sparber holds a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, where he also finished his graduate studies. During his studies, he spent time at Sorbonne University in Paris and Rutgers University in New Jersey, in Liechtenstein, where he received his primary and secondary education. Ambassador Sparber is married to Yvonne Sparber. They have 5 children.
It's great to be here, and I do appreciate your interest in my country, Liechtenstein. And you know what I think I'm going to do is give you a little bit of an introduction to what kind of a country and what kind of a people we are. I do try to keep it short, but I told you, President, I'm literally paid for doing this, talking about my country, so he's going to give me a sign when I'm going too long, and usually the more interesting part are the questions anyways. Maybe get started with just a very brief, location of Liechtenstein, historically, geographically. I don't know how many of you have been to Liechtenstein. I know you have been, and you know us very well. So we're really in the center of Europe. If you travel east to west or north to south, you come very close to my country. But we're one of the smallest countries, so you may miss it if you don't pay attention. 40,000 people, 6th smallest country in the world, geographical size of Washington, D.C., more or less. But we have been around for quite some time. The US has a very important anniversary coming up next year, 250 years. We celebrated our tricentennial in 2019. So we've been here for a little bit longer, throughout, more than 3 centuries that have been very turbulent centuries in our continent, in Europe. But we've managed to, remain sovereign as a country within our borders, unlike many others around us. And I think a little bit the angle from which I want to go about my talk about Liechtenstein is what are the priorities of a country like mine, in diplomacy, in its relations to other countries, in its relationship to its neighborhood. The obviously overarching aim of every country is to preserve its sovereignty and its independence. And Liechtenstein has survived 2 world wars very close by, certainly with a little bit of luck, but I think also with sort of a foresight in how you strategically position yourself vis-a-vis, your neighbors, your region, but also partners like the United States. Liechtenstein, for the better part of its history, I would say up until right after the Second World War, was a very rural, poor country, agricultural economy, self-subsistent for the most part. But we've seen, throughout our history, mid to late 19th century, 2 or 3 major emigration waves from Liechtenstein to the US, for example, because there was no prospect of, prosperity. Back home, there was poverty. And we still see the traces here today with, family names and connections that people have to their ancestors who emigrated. But then, after Second World War, something I think very exceptional happened. Liechtenstein underwent a very, very fast industrialization and development to become what is now certainly one of the countries who are sort of most industrialized, most developed in a very short period of time. We did not directly benefit, from US support, for example, through the Marshall Fund, but certainly the economic program that the US launched to redevelop Europe has benefited us as well, as we've been in the central part of Europe at that time and participated in that development. What we also had at the time, I believe, is what you can call sort of a startup mentality. So many of our industrial champions today go back to that time, started in a garage as a family business, have developed and are now global players in certain areas. Liechtenstein, as I said, right now, it's a very high salary environment. Workforce is expensive, but still our economy today has a percentage of about 40% of manufacturing. And that is much higher than many other countries have. It's certainly much higher than the United States. One of the priorities of the current administration is the reindustrialization of America. And I believe that's something that we can contribute a lot. Our economic footprint, at least for our dimensions, I believe is a very proud one in the US. So we have 40,000 people at home. Our companies have around 7,000 jobs in the US. So it's been a very, very well developing economic relationship. They're all in manufacturing and construction. So it's sort of the kinds of jobs that I think everybody would want to. And I think that's a path forward for us also as we develop this relationship with the United States. So the economic development is a very significant part of how we see ourselves preserving our sovereignty as a state. The other part is integration into our neighborhood and integration into relations with other states. A country like Liechtenstein can never think about sovereignty in terms of independence and isolation. Sovereignty for us means preserving as much policy space as we can, and that has always meant integration in the international community. Most importantly, with our neighbors. So our relations, our closest relations we have with Switzerland, our neighbor. We go back over 100 years with a customs union that links our 2 economic spaces into a very contiguous economy. And then, of course, very importantly, for 30 years now, we are part of what is called the European Economic Area. It's not the EU. We're not a member of the EU, but we're part of the single market, so to speak. So we have access to the full market in the EU without being part of the political union. Every EU country is part of the European Economic Area, plus Liechtenstein, Norway, and Iceland. It has been devised as a transitional step towards EU membership, but by now, I believe has proven its value very much for everybody, as it allows us to, really access the full potential of the EU market. So it is easy to see that a country like Liechtenstein has such a small sort of domestic market that you need access to other bigger, marketplaces in Europe, but also in the US, and that's a major priority for us. But you also need, and what we're constantly fighting for, is of course a recognition of a common set of rules that gives us a level playing field. It's always a little bit difficult for smaller states to prevail against the bigger ones. So we are very, very strongly pursuing the development of a rules-based international order. And when that order comes under pressure, as we see today, that's always a bad development for us. A cornerstone of our recent history of sovereignty has certainly been our membership to the United Nations. You mentioned it. I've been serving myself at the UN twice in my diplomatic life. That is an overriding foreign policy priority, not only to be a member of the United Nations, thereby being recognized by all other states in the world, but actually to be an active member and to shape, the international legal framework on which we rely in turn for our sovereignty. So these are not easy times when it comes to, priorities like promotion of international law, a level playing field in terms of trade, access to markets. All of these issues are under pressure right now, and they're under pressure as a consequence of, the major developments we see in the geopolitical and geoeconomic dimensions. Things are rearranging, and small countries like Liechtenstein need to be very strategic about what partnerships we invest in, what international organizations we invest in. And certainly from my perspective, it is very clear that international organizations such as the UN, but also bilateral partnerships such as with the United States, will be the cornerstones of our foreign policy as we go forward. There are many aspects, I'm happy to go more into if you're more interested into history or more interested into the economy or policy issues we're right now discussing. We can certainly do that during the discussion. Let me maybe just add, for the time being, that Liechtenstein too, of course, is very affected by the security challenges that we currently face in Europe. The war in Ukraine has really brought security policy to the very forefront of our, government's foreign policy. We have a new government since last March, and security policy is the main priority of that government. The war in Ukraine is close by. 2% of our population are refugees from Ukraine. And it's not just an aggression by Russia against Ukraine. It's an attack on the European security structure that we rely on very heavily for our own security. And that, of course, has the very immediate effect that security policy is something that we pursue now also as a priority in our relations with the United States. For example, cooperation on matters like sanctions against Russia have become probably now the most intense areas of cooperation between our governments. So these things are all, in a way, developing as we speak, been developing as I've been on post here. I came right after the pandemic and before the war in Ukraine, and that certainly has changed my life as a diplomat a lot, I have to say. It certainly in a way, the post right now of the limited diplomatic network that Liechtenstein has, that people are most interested in right now back home. Everybody follows very closely what happens in the United States. I'd like to say also I've become very popular at home and everybody likes to talk to me. It's probably not me. It's probably what happens here in the US. But it makes this decision that Liechtenstein took 22 years ago to open an embassy here, the only overseas bilateral embassy that we have, makes that decision a very good one in hindsight and a very strategic one. And I believe it is with that broader strategic view that we have to also look at the challenges that we face ahead. We, more than others, need to have a time horizon that goes beyond what we would call an election cycle. We need to think ahead a little bit longer in decades of where you want to be and what your strategic advantages will be in a future that nobody knows right now. I think the very particular system of governance that we have is helpful in that regard. So some of you may know that we are a monarchy, we are a principality, we have a monarch, a prince, but we're also a democracy. So we have this unique system of both a head of state that, hands over his power to his son, he's not elected, he's not accountable to the electorate. At the same time, we elect the parliament, we have a government, the people are represented, and the people have very far-reaching direct democracy rights as well, including the right, actually, to vote out the monarchy as a system. So you have democratic legitimacy, but you have at the head of state level a person who does not face the pressures of an election cycle, which allows him to think more long-term, more strategically, and that has been a system that I believe has served us very well. I'm not saying it's a good system for anybody else, but certainly it's very broadly supported in Liechtenstein, and I believe at the right moments in our history, it has allowed us to take steps that, in hindsight have been of strategic value and maybe would have been more difficult for somebody to take that faced immediate pressure from the electorate, as some other countries do. So maybe I'll leave it at that. I touched on a few issues. Happy to have your questions, comments, please.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. I served at the U.S. mission to the UN and worked with the IAEA, but I want to ask a trade question. Under what tariff scheme is Liechtenstein operating?
That's a very good question.
And the follow-on to that, if it's a good one, you ought to establish sites in Liechtenstein from which other European countries to export to the United States.
Tariffs has been a very dominant aspect of my work. In the first round, when tariffs were announced early April, Liechtenstein received one of the highest tariffs, 37%. The reason for that was that the formula that applied only looked at the trade balance. And obviously, we're a strongly export-oriented country, if you want, from a US perspective, with a bad trade balance. So that's where we started. We are now, since August 1st, at 15%, which is something, we're not jubilant about, because we're strong believers in free trade. And, eventually we would like to see an abolishment of tariffs. But it's important for us to be at that level now, to have come down to 15%, also because that's the level the European Union is at. If there's a difference, if we're higher than the European Union, it's always an immediate disadvantage for our economy, because there's a threat of production moving abroad and so on. Also, what is of course a factor is that our neighbor Switzerland are at a very high level of tariffs, and our economies are so interlinked with each other that that has an impact on us as well. We export mainly high-end industrial goods in niche areas to the US. We produce a lot of that here as well. So part of it is, construction tools, for example. That's our biggest company here in the US. Automotive, car parts, steering columns of General Motor cars or Teslas and so on, produced here in Indiana. Dental industry, dental implants, things like that, where you have a niche area in an industry where you can compete globally and sort of be a market leader. That's our measure of success. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. A predecessor of yours 10 or 15 years ago was a full member of this club, and it was a lady, and we would love to have you. But I do have a question, which is, I understand that Liechtenstein has one of the highest life expectancies in the world. A baby born today in Liechtenstein can expect to live to about 85. And what would be the factors to which you attribute that long life expectancy?
I did not know that. I knew we had and thank you for mentioning my predecessor, Ambassador Fritsche. She was actually the first ambassador. I'm only the third in total. So she stayed here for a long time, but she opened the embassy, and I owe a lot of what I do to her really excellent work in DC. I think people in Liechtenstein, to your question on health, do have a high awareness of sort of living a healthy life. I mean, at the end of the day, I always say we're mountain people. 2/3 of our countries are mountains and forests. So it's not an urban area. People like to go into nature, like to hike, like to ski, which is the source of all our Olympic medals we've ever won. We have universal healthcare with a strong focus on prevention. We have some of the similar problems that the US has in terms of the cost of that system, which continue to rise. But certainly, outdoorsiness, sports, and so on is something that's very widespread. I don't know if that is really the explanation for the high expectation of life, but it's certainly a good contributing factor to it.
Thank you.
You mentioned security. You were talking earlier about taking the long view. Can you speak to what happens in a post-Putin situation for that? And also, can you describe a little bit more in detail why not full membership in the EU? Thank you.
The first question is a difficult one right now. Of course, when you look at the policies that the government's supposed to take, you do devise these policies against the backdrop of Russia that has sort of imperial tendencies towards Europe that you haven't seen in a long time. And that is probably something that you would look at independently of the current leadership in a way, So even if there was a scenario somewhere down the road when the leadership changes, that's not a sufficient basis, I would think, for a policy expectations that the policy of Russia would substantially change. We have many decades of experience with Russia in the fold of a cooperative European security system. Now it's not anymore. It's actively attacking and destructing that system. Certainly, we do continue to believe in formats such as the OSCE in Vienna that has included and still includes Russia to provide a path to the future when Russia is ready to sign on to those fundamental principles. Again, that a state and every state has the right to choose its own future. and to the inviolability of borders and state sovereignty. That unfortunately is all gone now, and we're very, very far away from those principles being restored, in my view. The security question for Liechtenstein is an interesting one because, Liechtenstein is surrounded by two neutral neighbors. We have no defense alignment with any other country. We're not part of NATO, but we are protected by these friendly neighbors, and those neighbors in turn are surrounded by a ring of NATO countries. So it's not necessarily sort of the first scenario you think about a kinetic warfare attack on Liechtenstein, because you have to get across an awful lot of resistance before that. But warfare's nature has changed also. And, we're looking much more at what you would call hybrid risks, cyber attacks, economic coercion, undue influence into your, societal and public discourse, frankly. And for those threats, there is really no geographical border. And we see that there is an urgent need for us to actively address those. And that's I think, what we're rightfully doing right now. With regard to the EU, the current integration format is one that is very broadly supported in the population right now. It allows us access to the market, which is what we want, but it allows us to do that with quite little administrative effort. If we were to join the European Union, it will probably mean, just for my foreign service, to have to triple the amount of diplomats to even be able to participate in all these decision-making bodies. So for us, so far, this has been a very lean mechanism. But of course, here again, since the aggression by Russia against Ukraine, things are changing a bit, because more and more political questions become front and center, where Liechtenstein needs to think about how we position ourselves. We never had, from the first moment, any doubt, for example, that we will fully participate in the sanctions regime against Russia. But those are political decisions, not economic decisions, and you incur certain risks for which the EU protects itself as the EU, but that doesn't necessarily include countries like Liechtenstein. So I think we are in a phase where there's a bit of a rebalancing. Also, how closely you want to align with the EU in political terms. I don't think we will be member of the EU anytime soon, but without any doubt, we're a member of this community of values that makes Europe right now, and that will express itself in measures, I think, and alignments that we haven't been so familiar in the past.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for coming and speaking to us. One thing I want to ask you is just about the tariffs. How much does that really impact or hurt or help your tourism industry? Number one, that's one thing. The other thing I want to say is the partnership with America in the current administration. As much as you can talk about it, how is it? Is it stable? Is it good? Is it a good relationship? Is it not? Talk about that, please.
No, I mean, your first question about tourism, I do not think there has been an effect on tourism coming to Liechtenstein. I have no numbers for Liechtenstein right now, but I think I've read somewhere that actually there's quite a lot of American tourists coming to Europe these days, which will also include Liechtenstein. Tourism is not that an important factor for us economically speaking. It's not that big a part of how we earn money. We have tourists, of course, but it's not, I mean, you mentioned some of the examples from Northern Italy. It's not really overrun. There's no mass tourism comparable to other places around us. If you ask me about the relationship to the US right now, I think it has great potential for us to come even closer together. I don't think we've ever had a broader and deeper partnership, broader in terms of the topics that we address together and deeper in terms of the level of detail on which we work together. And that is an excellent basis for us to move on. We have what we call now a strategic and economic partnership, which sort of covers these two essential areas that I mentioned, the security aspects and the economic aspects. And economic security itself has become really an overriding priority for us. We've had very intense discussion with the current administration over the last few months, in particular on economic issues, and those discussions have been fruitful for us. I think they've really advanced our mutual understanding of each other. I think we have a better grasp of what the administration is really driving at with its industrial policy, for example. I do believe that is something we are contributing to already, and we can maybe do more. There are issues, for example, in the area of education, where I believe there's very strong interest in this administration to work together. If you ask me, the backbone of our industrial success in Liechtenstein is the system of apprenticeships that we have. 2/3 of our children age 16 go to vocational training and work in a company. That's still the exception in the US. It's still the companies from Liechtenstein in the US coming to me, telling me that they lack skilled workforce for their operations. I think it's actually still a pretty bipartisan issue also. So that are the areas where we have expertise that we can share, and we have a mutual interest to advance that. And to me, that's excellent news. And we have, in a couple of weeks, a new US ambassador. She's on her way to Bern. The US ambassador to Switzerland is always also the ambassador to Liechtenstein. I met her yesterday, Callista Gingrich. She's looking forward to it, and I think we have a very good basis for closely cooperating during her tenure. You're very welcome.
I got a quick question. Thank you for coming. Tell us a little bit more about the monarchy. You have a king, you have a prince. Do you have a king or do you have a queen? Is it the firstborn, no matter what gender? Why is the prince serving as opposed to the king? Could you elaborate about the monarchy? Because it's so foreign to me anyway.
So we have a prince, and this is one of the rare occasions, I think, where English lacks words, where it usually has much more words than German has. We're in a principality, that's why our head of state is called a prince, but he's not a prince in the sense of the son of a king, so we don't have a king. A prince stands for Fürst in German, which is more like, a duke or so. But the principality, of course, is what the name is of the system. It's a hereditary monarchy, so the function of head of state is handed over to the firstborn son. That is defined in the family law of the princely house, and that is not decided by the people of Liechtenstein.
So if no sons, what happens?
I think there is a line of succession that would go to a different line of the family then. There's not a lack of sons, by the way.
You spoke of state sovereignty a bit of geopolitics, international affairs broadly, the importance of sovereignty to Liechtenstein. So, and also the important role that a country, maybe with a small land area and maybe small population such as yours, has, or maybe perhaps needs to have, on the global scale of diplomacy. So my question for you is, for nations like yours, which maybe have a smaller demographic footprint in that sort of landscape, in the field of geopolitics or international relations, do you feel that there needs to be a greater effort by those nations to play a strong role in international relations, such as international organizations like the United Nations and component organizations? I know you mentioned Organization of American States and all sorts of different organizations like that. And what kind of criticality would there be if there is not such an effort by those nations? Thank you.
Very, very good question. And I have to restrain myself to keep it to a few minutes on that. I think the aspiration for a country like mine must be clear. You have to be an active member of the international community and be recognized as such. That's a key component of being recognized as a state and as a sovereign state. There's a few things you need to be able to do that. First, I think be principled and consistent. That makes you a credible voice on some issues. You don't need to be a credible voice on all, 250 different agendas of the United Nations, but on a few, you have to have the aspiration to make a difference, to have the expertise to advance things. For Liechtenstein, it's traditionally human rights and international law issues, international criminal law, for example. We have invested a lot into fighting impunity for the worst crimes under international law. That includes the crime of aggression that we see right now committed by the Russian leadership. And then you have to be able to build coalitions with other states across continents. And that's a skill, I believe, that's often quite unique to smaller states, because we can only operate like that. If a big state has a great idea, be it for a big European state or the United States, there's a national gravitation towards that because of the powerful role that state plays. We need to have good ideas, and we need to manage coalitions around that. And coalition building is really, I think, a very important strategy that you have to pursue in a format like the United Nations. There's also the aspect that we have a very intimate interest in international organizations working well, being effective. Because if they're not effective, they eventually run their course, they lose legitimacy, and that is harmful to our policy priorities because we rely on those organizations. So reforming, making those bodies more effective is always a key priority for us. And one example, since you asked me for an example, how we do that has been at the United Nations. We have, for a very long time, been very unhappy with the performance, for example, of the Security Council, which is supposed to be the guardian over peace and security in the world, has not at all lived up to its mandate in many, many of the past, crises that we faced. And we've invested a lot in in addressing that, one of the avenues we have chosen to address it is to strengthen the international community as a whole, namely the General Assembly, where every country has a vote, in its mandate to pursue peace and security. The Security Council has the primary responsibility to do that, but not the only responsibility. And there is a legitimate say for everybody in those matters, in particular when those who are supposed to act fail to act so consistently. So that's just an example of, I think, a country like Liechtenstein has made a difference in the past, can make a difference in the future.
One last question, Ambassador. So in 2017, Liechtenstein was cited for not having religious freedom for all, mainly because it's in a monarchy. So obviously the Roman Catholic Church is the main religion for 73% of the population. In 2024, that bill was postponed indefinitely. What's the plan on addressing that now that it's been over a year?
So the fact that Catholicism is still our state religion is not really tied to the monarchy. Subsequent governments in Liechtenstein have tried to advance the separation of state and the church. It's proven to be a very difficult process. The relationship between the Catholic Church and some of the Liechtenstein communes, for example, they go back many, many centuries. There's many property issues that need to resolve. It's less an issue of discrimination, because what we do now, as we see these questions are difficult, is to make sure that there is no discrimination towards the other faith, such as, we have a sizable amount of Protestants in Liechtenstein and Muslim population as well. So discrimination should be an issue of the past, and equal rights should be guaranteed with this still special status that the Catholic Church has due to the very, very long interaction between state and church in our country.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, if you may, we're going to plant a tree in your honor down near the tidal basin. Yes, sir. And the coordinates will be provided to you soon. And we want to thank you for doing a wonderful job in answering some tough questions in here. That's usually how we sort of grade you. Can you handle these questions?